Shut up and sit down.
Hi guys, this is BUGMANS Workshop and Paint Studio. I'm Dodge and this is the paint palette tutorial. It's not a full length tutorial. What we've done is we broke down the video into 6 different sections so we can do 6 different versions of something. Example, leather, metallics, and you can get a good look at 6 different ways of doing things so you can find the colour for your army a lot faster than going through loads and loads of tutorials. So in a minute there's going to be 6 different images with timestamps so you can find the bit of the video that you want, and as this is not a normal layout of tutorial, I may not see you at the end, although I will be summarising everything at the end. So if I don't see you at the end, don't forget to hit like, subscribe, share with your friends and leave a comment if you want to request any more paint palette videos. Hi guys, here we are again with another paint palette, and this week, as requested by a few of our subscribers, we're doing some skin tones. We've done a variety of lots of different skin tones, mucking around with lots of different colours, but mainly what we've done here is just blend these skin tones together by doing 50-50 mixes. We've also done this in a way so that you can apply all these colours to faces and still bring out the details even though we're going to be painting on the arms. So I do hope this helps you with your skin tones. And straight off the bat, number 1, we're going to start with Games Workshop's TUSKGOR. As always with these painting tutorials, don't judge the paint quality too harshly as we try and rush through these to get more videos out for you guys. And the more of these paint palettes we get out, the better the series will be, as you'll be able to skip back and forth through the series and find loads of different colour tones for your own army. Once we've given that a couple of coats, the next thing to do is add a little bit of CADIAN FLESHTONE to your TUSKGOR. As you can see here, it's only a very subtle transition, and when you're painting these muscles, for example, you want to leave most of your colour in the underneath in those recesses, but we're going to glaze our way up here. As you can see, that paint's very, very thin, and we're just going from the shade to the top, and you can see that already starts to build up. Next we're going to add more CADIAN flesh, which is why you don't want to go over the top with the first mix of TUSKGOR and CADIAN flesh. Now we're just going to add a little bit more CADIAN flesh into there. And what I find is when working in small areas, not like armour but like faces, knuckles and skin tone, it's a lot easier to mix your paints rather than try and blend in a very, very small area. So it's something to note if you're painting faces, to actually mix your paints and do little layers at a time. Now we're just going to use CADIAN FLESHTONE on its own, and as you can see, because we've been adding little bits here and there and just doing the same technique, going over them same spots, you can see how that started to very quickly make a very smooth and easy transition. Some of these bits of video are a little bit longer than they need to be because I wanted you to see the glazes and the layers actually being applied within the video. So now we're going to add a Reclin Flesh Shade wash, and that's a Games Workshop paint. We're going to apply it extremely thin, but as you can see I've put too much on my brush there, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to wipe off my brush and then just use the arm itself as a palette and then start using that to spread around just to stop it being so strong in those recesses, as we're really using it as a filter to go over the previous brushwork that we've done in the highlighted areas. And now, because we've toned all that together a little bit better and removed any traces of brush strokes or patchy painting, we're going to go back to our CADIAN FLESHTONE and Kislev Flesh. You want this pretty much the same colour as the one before the wash, but maybe add a little bit more Kislev Flesh to brighten it up so you can contrast a little bit quicker. And now we have slowly worked our way up there. We're going to use just Kislev Flesh on its own. As you can see, I spend a lot of time on this video working on the knuckles because I find that's a good way to show the colour scheme transition quite well. And always starting from the place where I don't want the paint and pulling the paint towards that. I mean, that does sound very obvious, but a lot of people paint in directions that aren't beneficial to them. you really need to pay attention to what direction you're pulling your paintbrush rather than just putting paint onto the model itself. And pretty much to finish this one off with these nice transitions, we're going to add Flayed 1 Flesh by Games Workshop into some Kislev Flesh. And you can see I'm barely putting any on here, and the area that I'm applying it to is very, very small. And you can obviously use this technique in depth for doing faces as well. As you can see, I'm trying to show you those on the knuckles. It's what I was getting at when the pictures were coming up, is I'm simply trying to make it so you can apply these to faces as well. But I used an arm because it was easier to get the arm in focus. And that's number 1 done. You'll have to excuse the wristband that's on there, as this is actually an orc arm. I just wanted something with a nice scale to it so I could really show you the blending process with these colours. Number 2. This time we're going to start with Dryad Bark by Games Workshop. It's usually best to apply this in 2-3 thin coats, but as I'm only throwing these on for the sake of showing you the shading over the top of this, I wasn't too worried. I think I do put 2 coats on just to make sure we've got a nice even base to work with. After the Dryad Bark, we're going to add a small amount of Walnut by scale 75 into the Dryad Bark. And the technique that we're using for these is going to be very similar for every arm that we do. It's a case of mixing the paints, applying the paints on the washers, and then mixing even more colours into them. So now we've sort of faded out the colours over the top using that mix. We're going to add even more Walnut now to the same mix, so it's more Walnut into the Dryad Bark again. And the scale 75 colours are really, really good for glazing. I do recommend you pick some up because the pigment is so small. As you can see here, you can see the knuckles and the shape of this starts to be pulled out, and we've barely used any colours at all yet. It's really about finding the right colours that contrast and transition within these areas better. Now we're going to use Agrax Earthshade, and this is watered down because I obviously don't want to overdo it and change the colour too much. Agrax Earthshade is going to add a little bit more depth into those muscle areas, and also because the walnut is quite a pasty colour, it's going to add a filter over the top of that and slightly change the colour. And guess what we're going to do now? We're going to add even more scale 75 walnut into that previous mix. So it's more walnut now than Dryad Bark, but because it's a mixture of the two, it complements and blends really well with the underneath tones that we started with. You can see how we're starting to get that transition there, and obviously at this point, because we put that filter on, this is going to make this stand out a little bit more. Now we're just going to use walnut on its own, and you actually get to see what colour walnut is now I'm applying it here. I did really struggle to do this skin tone, as it's not one I do very often, or at all, but we thought we'd give all the skin tones a try for this video, so you can find what you're looking for really. 6 different bits of video, 6 skin tones. Now we're going to add Baneblade Brown by Games Workshop into that walnut. As you can see, again, I'm starting to work on the knuckles, and as with all the rest of these, you'll be pulling and glazing from the dark areas to the light areas, leaving a very small amount of paint on the bits that you actually want to highlight. Once we're done with that, we're just going to use Games Workshop's Baneblade on its own. Now you don't have to. Looking back at the video, I probably could have stopped at that walnut and Baneblade Brown, but I just kept taking it up as I wanted to show you the transitions you get when you just mix these colours together and keep applying small. I did start to find that this was getting a little bit pasty for what I wanted. Then we're going to very evenly apply an Agrax Earthshade wash Not an AGRAX Earthshade watch, as Andy calls it, which all of a sudden has caught on and he's laughing in the background because I called it an AGRAX Earthshade watch. Only our old subscribers will get that joke. And we're using that as a filter just to add a little bit more colour back into the Baneblade brown. Just sort of enrich that pale colour that we've got. So I wasn't quite happy with it. But at any point while you are watching these, you can stop and be like, oh, I'm happy with that colour scheme, and just stick with that. After that, I'm just going to do one more final highlight, really finely, on the knuckles and the top parts using Baneblade brown. As with all the others, at the end of this video, I'm going to say the reason we're using the arm here is so that you can see the result a little bit better. You can apply these to faces, which is why we're mixing so many paints, so you can work in a smaller area without doing too many layers and clogging up your detail, basically. You can also use other washes on top of this if it's a bit too pale for you, like Army Paint a strong tone or something, just to add some more colour in there. And number 3 now. Alright, number 3, we're going to start with Mournfang Brown by Games Workshop. Probably best to apply these in 2 coats, but I was just rushing through these trying to get that base on, as the details here are not as important as the actual application and colour blending. Now once we've done the Mournfang Brown, we're going to add a colour called COKUM Copper by Scale 75 into the Mournfang Brown. Only a small amount. As you can see, it doesn't show up that much, this mixture, but that's what we're doing in all these skin tones. We are doing very small thin layers and just changing the colour ever so slightly. Next, we're going to add even more of the COKUM Copper into the Mournfang Brown. At this point, it's about 50-50, I think. And you can see that's starting to highlight the lower tones as well. Starting from the shadowed areas with barely anything on your brush, and then pulling towards the raised areas. Let it dry for a second and keep going back and forth over it. After that, we're just going to use COKUM Copper on its own now. And at this point you get to see what the colour actually looks like. Same with the last arm actually. The techniques, if you're watching just this one through this, are pretty much the same all the way through. But these are just colour references. To be honest, I wasn't that happy with this one when I was done, so that's why I do 6 different ones in one video, so you can find the ones you're looking for. Next, we're going to use another Scale 75 colour called Blackheart Brown. And we're going to add that to the COKUM Copper. This is a little less orangey brown than the previous one, as you can tell, and it's starting to flatten out those colours a little bit. Which works for us because we've got a nice undercoloured base to work with, and then we're going to start bringing up the top areas where the light would hit, and sort of fade those out a bit more. Although this particular arm does get more blends on it than others, as we're going to use that exact same mix that we just used, but now we're going to add Games Workshop's Kislev Flesh into it. The reason we're putting in the Kislev Flesh is because it adds a variety of tone and colour to the skin. Whereas all the previous colours have just started changing the general shading. This is going to change the tone ever so slightly now as well. Again, just working from the lower sections to the top sections with barely anything on your brush, as you can see there. Barely anything. But once that dries, just go over it again. Next, we're going to add Seraphim Sepia. This is watered down so I can do it in multiple layers. Again, with all these videos, you can just stop wherever you want if you're happy with a particular colour that you've found. But the reason to do this in multiple layers is you can always add another layer. You can't take off a layer that you've done. This is also going to act as a filter and change the tones that we've put on. And this way we can go back to our previous mix, which was the Blackheart Brown, COKUM and Kislev Flesh, and re-highlight again, adding in just an extra bit of 3-dimension that the shade has now enabled us to work around. The last colour for this is model colour Desert Yellow. I'm just using that to pick out the very tips of the knuckles, the very top of the muscles there. And as you can see, just blending those colours rather than jumping from one to another really does help this model pop and look three-dimensional. And just like I said with all the other ones, the reason we mix the colours this way is so that you can apply this technique to faces without drowning out the detail in them. So this one didn't end up quite the way I wanted. It's similar to the one I did for the White Scars Praetorian for the skin tone. Bit more of a Mongolian sort of shade to that. Although in my opinion it ended up a bit more yellow than it needed to be. And we're on to number 4. This one was my favourite when it came to the actual colours blending really well on a small surface. So we started with Games Workshop's BUGMANS Glow, which is a colour most people will have used as a base for Flesh. And I obviously put that on really thin there, well thinner than necessary, so it's going to take a few layers. So after we've done a couple of layers on the BUGMANS Glow, get a nice even base, we're going to add Sandalwood by scale 75 into the BUGMANS Glow. Again, same with all these techniques at the moment, we are just mixing the colours so they blend a little bit better without too many layers. We're trying to get nice smooth transitions, so when you apply them to faces and things you don't block out the details there. Which is something I'm going to have to keep repeating through this video as people skip through these ones to the colour that they like. So after that, we're going to use Sandalwood by scale 75 on its own. As you can see, those colours, they blend really, really well. This is why this one was my favourite collection of blending colours. It's probably a skin tone I'll start using more often. I do apologise that these bits of video are quite long, but I did want you to see the application of the paint as we go through this, and how thin that paint is and how it's applied. As we don't want to go too far away from these colours, we're going to put a thin wash on it and then go back to some of the other colours that we've used. And this is a mixture of CARRBURG Crimson and Drushi Violet, both washes by Games Workshop. I mixed them to a consistency where they looked a lot darker than they usually would. This is just to add some more shade into the model and help exaggerate the highlights that we've got as well. Just be careful not to drown this, as you don't want it sitting in massive pools in all the recesses and looking too dark. It's always best to apply these in multiple layers. Once that is thoroughly dry, we're going to go to Sandalwood again. As we keep highlighting this, we're going to highlight less and less of the model. You can really start to see the three-dimension of this model pop out, and we've not really used that much in the way of colours. It's just the tones of the colours really work well together for this one. Again, like I was saying all the way through the entire tutorial, work from the shade to the light with very little on your brush, and then pull to the top. Next we're going to add Harvester Flesh by scale 75 into the Sandalwood by scale 75, and this is quite bright, but this is where the model really starts to pop. We're just doing very, very small areas here, and again you can apply this to a face so well, and it blends so well that you could really add some details and really exaggerate the face. And the last colour for this is Harvester Flesh. You can really use this to pick out those knuckles, as they are actually clasping something as they're in a fist, and it just takes enough colour away from the model to look like a really nice highlight. Just take your time when it comes to doing flesh. It's definitely worth doing. It's something I enjoy painting quite a lot. I do enjoy painting orc flesh as well, and there you go. I do hope that comes out nice enough for you on camera, but just those few colours, Sandalwood, CARRBURG Crimson, Harvester Flesh, BUGMANS Glow and Drusha Violet is all it took to do this one, which is why it's probably my favourite out of all the ones we've done. It has the least amount of paint needed. Number 5. So for this one, we're going to start off with a RHINOX hide, because we're going to do a much darker, slightly more reddish skin than the previous dark skins that we've done. Again, I did struggle with this one quite a bit, as it's not one I usually paint. Could be a very good colour scheme for your salamanders, even though salamanders are supposed to be like actual black flesh. Next, we're going to add red leather by scale 75 into the RHINOX hide. We're going to start glazing that up, and what we're doing here is we're taking out some of the RHINOX hide colour by dulling it down, rather than brightening the colour up or adding more colour to it. This makes the areas that haven't been painted with the red leather contrast a lot more and actually look darker, even though they're not technically darker at all. And as we did with the other ones, we're going to go to red leather now on its own by scale 75. If you've watched any of the other skin tones, you will know that we're just following the same technique here, and it's all about blending these colours and just doing very small layers. Some of these bits of video are a bit longer than usual, and that's so you can see the colours being applied and actually watch the colour difference as it transitions. Next, we're going to add Sharp Null Red by scale 75 into the red leather. And always remember when applying this that it will dry darker because it's acrylic paint. So you may think that's a lot brighter than it should be, but it will work out in the end. Next, we're going to use the Sharp Null Red again by scale 75, but we're going to add BUGMANS Glow into that. Only a small amount, as we don't want to make this too pink in the highlights and in the hot spots. Next, we're going to add an Army Painter Strong Tone, which is like an Agrax Earth Shade, except it's got less of a reddish hue to it. It's a bit more of a flat brown. I didn't want to exaggerate those red tones too much, so that's why I went for the Army Painter Strong Tone instead. And once that's dry, you can see how that's toned all of that together. And next we're going to use BUGMANS Glow with a small amount of RAKARTH Flesh, and we're going to use this just for hot spots like the tops of the knuckles, but then blend the knuckles just a little bit, tops of all the other muscles as well. It's up to you how far you go with these, but yeah, this one I think came out alright. It does look like the light is diluting the colour, which is something you need with this sort of skin tone. And like I've said on all of these, you can apply these quite easily to faces. We're just using the arm to show you it on a bigger scale, because it picks up better on camera and it helps us out if we don't have to faff with the camera too much. And we're on to number 6, the final one. This time we're going to start with Games Workshop's Steel Legion Drab. Again, you should apply this in a thinner coat than what I'm doing, but I'm just throwing them on there nice and quick, as the paint palette's not really about the quality of the paint job, more the colours and the schemes to achieve certain colours. Next up, we're going to use Army Painter Soft Tone. That's soft tone, not strong tone. As you can see, it's got a slightly different hue to this, and generally a slightly different colour. It's nowhere near as reddish or as dark brown. I do end up giving this 2 coats of Army Painter Soft Tone, as it seemed a little bit weak, but I always water those down to make sure I don't overdo it. Next, we're going to use Steel Legion Drab again, but we're going to mix a small amount of ZANDRI dust in there. The only problem I do have with the strong tone there, soft tone, is that it did dry quite reflective for some reason, whereas the other washes didn't. You can always sort that out with a matte varnish. Next, we're going to go to ZANDRI Dust on its own. This one's actually the shortest one out of the whole video, I think, as I didn't need to go too much further with this. Again, same techniques as all the other ones there, just covering up a smaller and smaller area every time we mix a colour or add a colour to it, and applying it in very thin layers. Next, we're going to use Model Air Sandstone. And that's what we're going to use to start picking out the very tops of the muscles and the knuckles. Because the ZANDRI Dust and the Steel Legion Drab are both base paints, I believe, it was very hard to blend these, so I ended up using another Army Painter soft tone wash, just to try and help smooth out those transitions a little bit. Now, it's completely up to you which wash you use. You could have used a Seraphim Sepia, but I thought that was a little bit too on the yellowy side, and we've already done a skin tone similar to that. Next, it's going to be Model Air Sandstone, which will work now because we've put a thin layer of the soft tone in there, so this will still work as a highlight over itself with just the filter in between. Again, very thin layers, working from the bottom of the muscles to the tops. As always, the paint job's not so important, it's just the colour blending and techniques that we're looking at here. And there we have it, number 6. It probably could have used a little bit more time and care, but it was dragging on into the day. It didn't really need that many colours, and if you just apply a few washes to it here and there, you can get all sorts of different results, which we may come back to the skin tones again at some point and do another set of different coloured skin tones. And there we have it, guys, all 6 arms are done. Just stick them on the Lazy Susan here and you get to see those spin round just so you can see them all again and compare the different colour schemes as well. So everything's completely different, 6 different skin tones. So I do hope this video helped you out, as it can be quite difficult finding the colour scheme you want. And if you enjoy this video and like the concept of this video, there are a bunch more in the playlist as well for different things. So don't forget to like the video and share with your friends so they can check these out as well. If you've got any questions, do leave a comment. We do try and respond to all of our comments. We have some thank yous to give out though before I clock off. We have to give a big thank you to the Alt Boys, Matt, Ludwig Hofbauer, Danny Wack, Mark and Dave. You guys are our top paying Patreons. You help support this channel. And without you, we won't be able to buy all these extra bits of model that we need to make the tutorials. And if anyone else wants to join them on Patreon, all the links are in the description, as well as a link to the Outpost. So if you want 15 to 20% off your hobby supplies, follow the link in the description. And if you buy anything through that link, we get some store credit as well for the advertisement, which is awesome of the Outpost. And that's all from me this week. I think we'll have another paint palette coming out for you very soon. It's either going to be Orc Flesh, Cold Metals or Zombie Flesh, I think. So don't forget to hit like, subscribe, share with your friends, and I will catch you in the next one, guys. Thanks for watching.